Hi, everybody, and welcome back from Easter vacation. I hope you are excited to be back with me as I am with you in this virtual space, where today we're going to learn about the age of Twitter, Donald J. Trump and the Politics of Debasement, written by Brian L. Ott. I want to start out, as usual, giving you a little bit of vocabulary that I think will clarify some of the concepts that Brian Ott gets into when he makes his case basically against Twitter. And these are media ecology. So, media ecology is a school of theory in media studies. It's also known as medium theory. Ott defines it as a perspective that suggests every communication technology, or medium, has key physical, psychological, and social features that are relatively distinct and fixed, and that these features shape how users of that medium process information and make sense of the world. And Ott uses this kind of definition of media ecology to arrive at the conclusion that Twitter trains us, and it trains us to devalue other people and cheapen public discourse, expecting only very simple stories that are high on affect but low on nuance. Related to the concept of media ecology is the idea of an affordance, which is that technologies are built with certain capacities, and sometimes they can do things other than their intended uses. So you can think of life hacks and how people use dustpans to do things like fill a bucket from a sink. That is an unintended use of a technology whose main affordance was to catch dust. So an affordance could be something like a handle on a teacup that allows you to grasp the cup without getting your hand too hot. Or, as Ott talks to us, the character limit on Twitter, which invites only certain kinds of communication, very short, snappy comments instead of sustained arguments. So an affordance is what a technology is built to do. And sometimes what it isn't built to do, but it's used for it anyway. Technological determinism is also part of the conversation when we introduce the notion of media ecology or medium theory. Technological determinism is, as the slide says, a school of thought that assumes that technologies shape and influence society, and indeed that they are the driving force behind a lot of technological, not just technological change, but social change as well. So I have my map on the right there. That is the railroad paths through the United States and other parts of North America. And early people who were proponents of medium theory said that the railroad fundamentally changed society. It changed our relationship to time because for the first time, time zones existed and people had to keep to a particular schedule for the sake of cross-continental commerce. It changed how we were able to conduct trade, and it changed our relationship to geography. So you might leave home and go to the other side of a country for the first time with relatively lower risk compared to taking the Oregon Trail or what have you. So railroad technology in particular is one of those that early people and famous technological determinists discuss. One is Harold Innis, another is Marshall McLuhan. This brings me to what I think is my last vocabulary term here, which is post-truth. This is unrelated to the other three vocab concepts, but it is central to Ott's arguments because he claims that we are in an era in which affect, that sort of sensation and vibe or charisma, affective responses, matter a little bit more than content, if not entirely more. Well, there's a dog cameo. So, per the Cambridge Dictionary Online, the post-truth era refers to a situation in which people are more likely to accept an argument based on their emotion and belief rather than based on facts. And that little comic to the side, I think, does a good job of taking that apart. I think, therefore, I am is a relationship to truth, and I believe, therefore, I'm right is a relationship to post-truth. And that comic is from Shovel. So Ott starts his short essay talking about the logic of Twitter. He's really talking about its affordances. So what is it designed to do? What are its capacities? Twitter has a limited character count. It has increased to 280 characters per tweet or message. It is a social media platform that's designed for microblogging, so sharing these short messages. Twitter also allows users to include links, tags to other users, hashtags and threads in their messaging. Threads are a new invention on Twitter in the sense that the platform is allowing people to keep tabs on fairly long connections of messages. So people do write essays on Twitter now. In 2016, I'm not sure that they could have in the same way. I don't think that it was an affordance built in the website yet. We can also use hashtags to categorize our thoughts, and we can include images and videos, which can have very complicated messages shared as a link on the microblog. So there are ways that people increase the complexity of Twitter, but Ott does not particularly get into these, and some of them have become more sophisticated in the 4 years since his article was published. His key arguments are that Twitter is transforming the character of our public discourse for the worse, and that discourse on Twitter is simple, impulsive, and uncivil. To the first point that Twitter demands simplicity, Ott says that short messages preclude the possibility of complex arguments. If you're only using 140 characters to share an idea, your idea will be simple. It cannot be complicated. Ott goes on to say that tweets are tailored to and promote short attention spans, so it's a transformation towards superficiality that is happening because of Twitter. Ott's second point is that Twitter promotes impulsivity, so we don't think very hard about what we tweet. It's almost effortless to send a tweet. You just pull up your phone, type something, and hit send. And Ott says that the design of Twitter may in part account for how people end up saying horrible, fat-shaming, racist, homophobic, and otherwise hurtful and ill-advised things online. So people who should know better still publish tweets that are completely insane when you think about regular rules of social decorum. But it's so easy to send a tweet, and it exists in this sort of virtual space that's detached from other things, so people tweet without thinking. Ott carries on and says that Twitter fosters incivility because Twitter is informal. If you're writing someone an email, ideally you'll have a salutation at the beginning, like, "Dear Dr. So-and-so," and you'll have a sign-off at the end. So you're treating someone like a human, there's a genre, and you're adhering to certain generic norms. And on Twitter, the generic norm is to be pithy and funny and maybe even a little bit cruel. Twitter also depersonalizes interaction, so you don't see someone reacting in real time to what you say. Instead, you have, a Twitter storm perhaps in consequence of your actions online, but it still isn't a face-to-face interaction. So you could insult somebody on Twitter and even tag them in the insult and feel like it's appropriate in a way that many other communication media do not support. So Ott goes into a case study which is about President Trump's tweets, and I do want to apologize to my conservative students out there because this article is clearly very biased, and Ott takes something of a doomsday approach to the way that Donald Trump tweets and to the assumptions he was making about the forthcoming presidency. So I did not assign this to impose a bias or to indoctrinate anyone, but rather to help illustrate these other points about media ecology and to see what your opinions are about how Twitter might be shaping public discourse. So to look at Ott's case study, we can see that Ott argues Trump's tweets and Trump's way of speaking in general matches really well with the kind of transformation that Twitter is working on discourse overall. Ott refers to a deep Drumpf Twitter bot that studied Donald Trump's way of speaking in order to replicate it, with sometimes sort of realistic looking results. So the deep Drumpf bot used simple language, deferred to colleagues and friends, so it would, at somebody else in Trump's network, and then insult opponents. And we do know that these are characteristic patterns of Donald Trump's public discourse. In a colleague of Ott's named Crockett's study, Trump's tweets were found to be simple and repetitive, usually negative in connotations, so somewhat bleak, perhaps somewhat aggressive towards opponents. We know this with his artful framing of his opponents throughout the 2016 election and now today. And Trump's tweets have also been full of affect, so lots of exclamation points and lots of caps. So it can create what Ott and Crockett referred to, borrowing other scholars' work, as emotional contagion, the way that Trump tweets encourages an emotional response in the people who are his followers. Ott then shares with us a postscript, which the editor of this special forum allowed Ott to share after the results of the election were in. So the first version of the article was before the November election in 2016, and then Ott revised it. So here's what he said in the revision. He said, "We need to be more critical of our reliance on social media platforms as primary news sources. And apparently this is one of the main themes of the class now that I have to sit down and make videos about it. Don't trust social media platforms for news. In part because they don't foster reasoned public deliberation," says Ott. And then Ott also says the mainstream news media shouldn't rely on Twitter as a lead. It shouldn't be a source because of all of the various ills that Ott lays out about Twitter earlier. So he's encouraging us to trust human editors who follow journalistic standards, who use research and their ethics in order to select what's appropriate to share, instead of algorithms which only give us what they think we want and what we may generate revenue for. So rely on research, not opinions. Rely on human editors, not algorithms or bots, and we will still have high-quality news. Don't dunk on all the news, y'all. There is good news in the mainstream national media. However, some of it is using some bad tendencies, such as relying too heavily on tweets, according to Ott. So I want you to think about a couple of questions in terms of how you might respond to Ott's arguments, not all of which are unassailable. I think that you can definitely take exception to a lot of what Ott has said here, and I will give you an opportunity to do that on the quiz on Friday. So I want you to consider whether or not you can think of times when people have been overly simplistic, impulsive, or rude on social media platforms. So can you think of evidence in your own life that supports Ott's bleak outlook about Twitter and its impact on society? But then I want you to consider the flip side. Are there times when Twitter has helped create complex ideas? Think about the threads that people share long essays with. Has Twitter ever helped people organize in a long-term and significant way? How about the Arab Spring in 2011? And has Twitter created opportunities for empathy and community building? How about half of what's happening right now during COVID-19? So I think we can find good counterexamples to some of Ott's claims. I also want to know if you think the article's 2016 publication date, so fresh after the election of President Trump, had a huge impact on Ott's arguments and perhaps indicated some short-sightedness. I'm not declaring that it did, but I'm curious if you have a response to that. And then finally, does Twitter only have negative effects? Why or why not? And that you're pretty likely to see on Friday. So I hope you're doing well, and I'll see some of you soon.